That's with a Z.
You haven't said that in mine.
Yeah.
Matt, I thought it was funny because their fonts are the same color as the ASAE. I was like, this green and blue looks very familiar.
I guess I think it's their brand color.
Yeah.
Bye, Drew.
Matt, do you have that agenda I gave?
Yes. I want to say
Alright.
we have different sheets.
Wait,
Jason, I think this is yours.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot.
Is it your notes?
You weren't able to.
You're thinking like, is this only supposed to take a minute?
There's no way.
All right. For those of you who are also just getting here, if you wouldn't mind filling that out. It should only take a couple
How
minutes.
old am I? That's like a HIPAA violation.
And don't sign your name. It's supposed to be.
Anonymous.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you're gonna figure out.
Obviously, yeah. Obviously, some of these things.
Go age 19, Zeus Robert.
Maybe we're on makeup and
19,
big
oh my
fishes.
God.
Brown bag itself for me just basically
It's my profession.
documents.
My profession is not the
What they're
drug
doing.
you wrote.
Yeah, I mean, this is
Break it
going
out
which
because
is
we can't break out.
Yeah, I mean, we might have like teams of two.
10 more days.
So we might shuffle one table with the other or something, you know.
Where are you from?
Like, where do I live right now?
Hey,
Whatever you want to answer.
Hey, Joe.
Whatever you,
Are we doing this
We
during?
write our name.
what's up?
This is
This will be before we get completely started.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what you said, sir?
Do we write our name?
No.
No.
Give you one to keep like on your person or wherever, and then you can take that one and then put it on the back of one of your sheets whenever you're done. So I'm gonna do.
Do we fill out the second page too?
Yes. Again, quick. Doesn't have to. Don't like go crazy.
So even though we haven't seen this, we're supposed to fill out the second half? Same?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, what would you say in that
Okay.
situation? What might you say? You know, think of it like that. I'm actually gonna give you one of these, put on your sheet, and on you, and then one for your sheet.
Identifier.
You throw one of those on the sheet and keep one for yourself.
Just put it on the sheet somewhere?
Yep. And then I'm gonna do the same for you, Chad.
One on the sheet, one not on the
Yes.
sheet. Anywhere on the sheet.
Yep. Alright, so just a little reminder or thing to remember. When we're gonna be on a tight time frame, so I'm gonna give us time to do the different exercises. When we're in the last 30 seconds of each exercise, you're gonna hear some music playing, just to let you know that we're getting there. And that's sort of where, you know, I'll ask everybody to either ramp up the ideas or the conversations, knowing that we are about to sort of wrap from that in. All right, so everybody has filled out their sheets. I know Ryan is doing his, but we will just go ahead and do that. And then if you're done, go ahead and hand me your sheet.
That's it.
Okay. Did you put a sticker on yours? Wait, who didn't put a sticker?
I didn't
picture?
I like it.
All right, there you go.
All right, cool. Thank you.
I wonder who submitted that one. So these are all my post-it notes, right?
They're going to be for everybody. All right, so I'm about to start playing music on you, man.
Almost done. You ready, ASAE?
Yes.
The Jeopardy jumps will go one too long for our thing about.
See, you got the music, man.
I think the one thing we need slide for is like when you first walk in. When you first walk in, you have a slide with those instructions.
Yeah. Yeah, that does make sense. All right, so thank you all for coming. My name is Joseph Carter Brown. I am on the design team with my partner here, Matt. I do a lot of branding and UX-focused design for Unleashed Technologies. So we want to thank you all for being here. I'll let Matt go ahead and give a quick intro of himself. We'll just
Hi, I'm Matt Curtin. I'm a senior designer and front-end developer here at Unleashed Technologies. And Joe Carter Brown, also on our team for branding and UX and front-end development here at Unleashed. So today, we'll be covering basic concepts of human-centered design through practices and exercises that you'll be running through. Thanks for filling out this initial one here that will kick off all of our exercises throughout this entire presentation. Along with that, we'll also be interjecting some thoughts and some information on microinteractions and how those microinteractions aid in human-centered design in that general concept. We'll also be going through some do's and don'ts with microinteractions.
So we're going to be doing some brainstorming. We're going to be doing some rapid prototyping and some general human-centered practices. So before we get into that, I just want to put out a few different ground rules, things that we should try and keep in mind if we're in the room and sort of the social agreement that we have with each other. So the one is stay focused. You know, we have a little bit of time to do a lot of things, so having all of our focus on the task is going to be important. Suspending judgment. We're going to hear a lot of ideas. We're going to hear a lot of crazy ideas. That's encouraged, as you can see, encourage wild ideas. So you're going to hear things that might make you go, keep that in mind, but encourage those ideas. Suspend your judgment until we get into certain portions. Embrace ambiguity. That means we're going to be working with a lot of formless stuff that in the initial portion might not make sense. So you have to be willing to embrace that, understanding that it's not going to seem perfect. It's going to be all over the place at times. Also be visual. So if you're thinking of something, as we start getting into some of the prototyping, write it down. Put it on a sticky, put it on the board. Don't hoard your Post-its. You know, don't I've seen people where they fill out a bunch of them and they hold them all in their hand before they go on the board. Just throw them on the board. They're no longer your ideas. They're part of the group. One idea per Post-it and be ready to share ideas. We'll try and do share backs after each exercise. And then again, we want to do less talking and more listening when we're discussing ideas. But we, again, want to be active and present in providing ideas and conversation. As ideas are being thrown out there, we want to also try and build on those. So to take that improv type method of the yes and. Yes and. I like this idea. Yes, and we could do, etc. How do we expand on this idea? How do we take it from there? And then the thing that you always remember is that everything we're doing is a prototype. Whether it's this workshop and our practicing here, whether it's taking these processes and building on them, they're always a prototype. So they're always prone to change, and we have to be willing to evolve with that in real time. So the first thing we're going to start working with, and what you all have started doing, is building an empathy map. That's going to be one of our key things to human-centered practices, is understanding who our user is and how do they feel. So we are going to, what's our next slide? Yeah, so we'll wait on that one. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start building off of what we wrote down on these sheets. So what I'm going to do is I am going to, Sarad and Jenna, you all will be on the same team. That will be your user focus. And then this team, and I'm going to sort of switch. This is yours, I'm assuming, I know. So I'm going to put you on the blue team with Jenna and Sarad. Okay. Does that work? Sure. So I'm going to keep this, and I'm going to give you that.
First one I grabbed, Ryan.
So, what we're going to do is I set up some areas over on the board, over on the walls here. So, we're going to do some moving around too. So, don't get too comfortable sitting. I'm going to give everyone a sticky pad and a Sharpie. And what I would like everybody to do is you got these two case subjects that we're working from. Let's pretend we don't know who the people are in this room, but let's also know who we're expecting here. So what I want you all to start doing is very little information because we only have a smaller group. Start looking through these different answers and start finding themes that may seem common throughout these people and try and build out on those. If you guys come over to, let's say, Saraja, Ryan, you want to come and use this wall here or this grouping to sort of throw down some of the different sticky ideas that you're having and then start making those groupings. We can do that here, and then Chad and Jeff, I have another group over here that you all can use. I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock. We're going to do this really rapid fire because, again, this is the brown bag, so I'm going to need to sort of speed it up a little bit. So, not sitting down. Let's come over to the board if you guys don't mind, please. I know. And there's Sharpies on the table if you need them. Everybody got a Sharpie? You get one? Okay, cool.
We want to break up with
What's that? No, everybody should have one.
So we're taking these.
Yeah,
what are we
all you're doing
right
is you all start talking about what you're seeing in these themes. You're going to be building essentially commonalities. And we only have 2 sheets, so it's not like we have a ton of information to go off of. So we want to start making certain assumptions as well on these people. And discuss amongst yourselves what types of things or patterns you might see or themes that we might be able to sort of build on from there. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right.
What are we building?
Start writing stickies and we'll get to building. We're building a user right now. We're building an empathy map.
So JCB, traits of our users on board.
It's traits
Based
of
on what
your
we read?
based on what you're reading, and then we're going to start grouping those into sort of common themes that we might be
Well,
seeing.
not like
Okay.
like college age or something. So can we write that in my head?
I think we can just write whatever we want. Just write stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's ideas, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be 100% the idea that you're going to always lean on and throw them over there. Yeah.
I don't know how to spell anything. You're writing too small. No one can read
Yeah, use a Sharpie.
any of the Sharpies. You're not listening. Baltimore.
Sorry.
Middle age. Oh my
I was
god.
inspired about that.
Right?
I was inspired by what Jim was saying, so I'm like,
Did say middle aged. I thought of
Damn you, Jack.
I know, right?
Damn it. We should be doing this as a team.
Well, we are.
Nah, I know.
We're aligned.
So yeah, like our sort of goal in this type of setting is really just to, just what we're doing, encouraging them to just push out ideas, and post them. In this sort of portion, there's a lot more cross-talking that's expected, or not expected, but also encourage discussions and things like that. But like maybe in like those earlier, the diverge session, it would be more of trying to limit things like side meetings and like, I'm thinking this, and it's like, let's throw it on the board, and then we can discuss those ideas.
curious to see how they didn't really give us much information on like what we have at our disposal in terms of
I was just like grouping these.
like are we going to be able to do this?
Right. Well, I know.
Dogs, you'll be reading that.
Educated, that's a good one.
What's the word? I know they asked for like different supplies, and I'm assuming that we'll probably have some wall space. So I'm just hopefully we'll have a chance to maybe check it out beforehand, so that we can figure out a plan. I might have to go and buy a new one of these.
Let me know. I can get us to expense something. So
Yeah, that might be.
yeah, so we need something like this.
Yeah.
We need.
All right, you're still going. It's 30 seconds.
We need like this.
Yeah, there will be. I asked for stickies, and I think I asked for Sharpies in the thing for the ASAE thing, but I didn't think about these big pads. I'll double check that.
I think that's it for me too.
And pencil down. All right. Cool. Thank you. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a quick share back with the teams. I'm going to give everybody just a brief minute to go over that. So I'll ask you all to go first, and you all decide who wants to maybe share back, or actually we'll have everybody share back just a little bit about what some of the themes were that you wrote down based on this user information.
Sure.
Cool. Whoever wants to jump in.
You want me to run through them, Chad?
Yeah.
We have a lot of overlaps. We noticed that everyone in our survey, they're tech savvy. They have somewhat, at least an intermediate technical background. So Rod, thanks for your honesty there. I appreciate that. Everyone here in our group was a web developer, so that's pretty easy to isolate. We're also all from the United States. We have a lot of positive people. Unprepared, Chad, I think that was yours, probably just specific to what we were going to be talking about. But I saw the words eager, I saw the words interested in learning. So definitely overall positive vibe. They're common-centered at this moment, as told by the last question on the survey. Curious and eager sort of fall into the same grouping there. Everybody wrote in print. We all have room to grow. Everybody mentioned exercise, dogs, yoga, and exercise. And they're research focused, so they're interested in improving themselves based on data.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. Just so in interest of time, do you all want to take a few minutes to just, I know you all were throwing in some different ideas. What are some of the ideas that you all saw as you went through your sheets?
We had similar things as well, like tech savvy. Moods were actually for relaxed and stress. And then, but most people are kind of in the web and design oriented profession. Like they use the words UX, so they obviously knew what that was.
Mm-hmm.
I guess in terms of hobbies, I said low-key hobbies like whiskey and pets and things like that. And then East Coast, everyone's kind of from this area, local area. And no fire pet for the above.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so I appreciate everybody taking a minute to share back. I'm going to just keep pushing through the next slide here because we're going to talk about, first off, what is human-centered design, and we'll talk about what we're doing and what this is. So the term human-centered design is thrown around a lot lately, and what that means is a creative approach to problem solving. As designers, we have a certain process that we go into when we start thinking about projects. So it's trying to use those thought processes in a way that helps bring everybody into the equation. So it starts with people, those that we're designing for and with, thinking about who's using it, how they're using it, what their needs are. That's why the key word in that is always empathy. It's how do we get closer, how do we understand them a little better. Ultimately, and the reason we do this is we want to skew towards action in every step. That means we don't necessarily know maybe what we're building out of this, or we haven't completely formulated that, but that's why we embrace that ambiguity, and we go toward action to enable us to start prototyping. That's why we, again, iterate, and we validate. We take that information and we're going to double check it. We'll get into that a little later. But at every step, we're going to then take our observations, reflect on those, and refine. That's why we do our share backs, so that we are now seeing there are commonalities between both groups, but there are other things that Jenna saw that Chad didn't get, or things that Sarad got that Brian didn't get. And so now we're getting those ideas on the table, and we can start to use those. Now, the core difference between human-centered versus user-centered design, for starters, users are often considered perfect. They're perfect for us, and they need us. So our user, this is what our user looks like. Faceless, nameless, just user. They love us because they love buying nuts and bolts, right? We make nuts and bolts, so that's why they love us, right? That's because they love buying those things, so they come to us for that reason. They also exist only in one condition usually. They want more nuts and bolts for a nuts and bolt party. That's what their need is, right? So they would naturally come to us. Everything is perfect for us because they're often made up. We went to the Hogwarts mechanical school. You know, we make up these things, and then we make these vast generalizations. Oh, well, it's a mechanic. They probably like dirt and working with tools, right? That just makes sense. So we usually make these vast generalizations that become our users. Whereas when we talk humans, we have to remember they're imperfect, and they don't care about us. They don't need nuts and bolts because they like nuts and bolts. They need nuts and bolts because their bike lost a wheel bearing, and they need to get a new bolt to put it together. They don't care about the nut and bolt. They care about their bike. So now we're gaining that empathy for their situation. Their conditions and their circumstances might vary. So this Krista has meetings all day. She's not even sure when she'll have time to make it to the store. She's real and can be validated. You know, this isn't the person I know, but I know I have a friend in Seattle named Krista who I talked to recently, and maybe didn't know you could buy nuts and bolts online. And then they also have needs outside of us. Again, usually in generalizations, we make up their needs. Their need is they just want more nuts and bolts, so it's a perfect situation for us to show up. But this human has needs. They need to make a dish for an office potluck. They need to coordinate with their husband who takes the kids to soccer. All of these things are going to play into our user journey. And we're going to use that user journey to understand how they associate with us. And that's where we're starting with here with the empathy mapping and understanding those clusters. Because while it's okay to make some assumptions, we have to start with assumptions. We have to also validate that, and we do that by creating user journeys that we can also validate off of. You want to share some stuff on our... So we have a user that we practice on, and I'll let you take it from here.
So we took Chris Jorgensen, and we made a user story for him. So we asked him some questions that helped us map it. What we wanted to do is kind of come up with our sample user journey for Chris J that we'll elaborate on as we go through this exercise. But looking at kind of the high overview of who he is. He's 38. He went to College Park. He's director of marketing at a tech firm, and he's been in the industry for 16 years. Some hobbies, he loves doing activities with his family, and he loves following College Park football games and basketball games. So looking kind of deeper into what his interests are, he likes keeping up with the latest technology trends, networking with peers, and getting ideas for 2018. So this slide in particular is kind of looking at what Chris J is coming into the Technology Expo with what his interests are there. But if we are looking at this particular exercise, I think we would want to kind of shift that focus to what are these users coming into, what are their interests are coming into this presentation, this luncheon learning roundup. Some of Chris J's pain points with the conference is the holiday season timing. It's kind of an awkward time for our conference due to the week before Christmas. He's busy with holiday shopping, things like that. Doesn't really have time to attend something like this. No location to document ideas for later. He might benefit from having a way of taking notes and saving some ideas. And then connections from the conference are lost due to the long holiday break. People he might meet during this conference, he might lose track of, and now that everybody's going to go on vacation right after this conference. So that kind of leads us to this next exercise where we're kind of finalizing our user story and journey, looking at what we've already started creating with this user profile. How did they get here? What are some of their pain points? How could their experiences be improved along the way? And then thinking in terms of entering this brown bag rather than the conference center.
Right. So yeah, what we would do, and we're going to move into the next exercise here, is creating a user journey for this person. Now I'm going to ask you all again. I mentioned that we do make some assumptions. We have to have some assumptions. So what I want you all to do first is spend a couple minutes, maybe 5 minutes, quickly take these themes. So teams gather over here, look at what your general themes are, and use that to make that user story first off. Like give your user a name, how old they might be, and maybe some of those key things, like one interest and a quick idea of their purpose for coming to this brown bag, for instance. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start doing a actual user journey map, which we're going to start with how we can change their experience in this sense in approach to the brown bag. So we probably start in one end and say, what's the end goal? The end goal is that they make it to the brown bag, right? Or it might be using the information post brown bag. So we're going to start building steps, what they need from each step, and then how we could maybe change their experience to make it maybe fit their needs a little more. You know, what types of things might this do? Now, some of these things might make more sense in context of the conference, like, you know, in different ways, and I can explain more of that. But yeah, that's what we're going to do now. So I took somebody's sheet. I'm going to ask you guys to go ahead and just talk over your groupings, and I'll give us about 5 minutes on the clock to do that, and then we will move into the next step. What's that? I think for this part, you can take these groups and maybe you can identify like the general story.
You can just put it on the wall.
What their name is.
Unless we need
sort
to
of like the Chris J thing. What their name is, how old they are, maybe a few pain points that they might have encountered based on this, and what types of things maybe they would like. You know, we're making some assumptions here. So you can throw them on stickies and just post them up here, or you can just write directly on that. That's up to you all.
All right, Joe.
So
What's his or her name?
yeah.
His or her name.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Him
I
or
wanted to post it.
could be either. Seems
Could be
kind
either.
of seems kind of yeah. Yeah, that works.
I'm going to take a picture of this.
That was in Josh's name.
Is it?
Yeah. Okay. That would be Joseph. Or Josephine.
Nice.
We have 5
Sam.
minutes. We have 5 minutes. We're going to spend the entire 5 minutes trying to come up with a name
How
for
old
this
is
person.
he? Sam is on 40. I saw 21. I saw 23. So
Samuel.
Split the difference. 32.
32.
Just like 30.
Almost there.
So,
Samuel J.
and I think everybody was from the general.
Solid
Let's
start.
go with let's just go with Paul.
Okay.
Sam Smith.
That's what I
I'm
saw.
actually a
I was
singer.
thinking.
Add slides.
Yeah. That's what I was like.
Body like
Whatever.
That's really that's perfect.
Just go with the guy.
Well, I can't stop thinking about mine like that.
Well, oh, don't like the name
Since
anymore.
that seems to be the average.
We call him Samuel.
Okay.
Okay, so
That's toward that's
We need to come up with some
Peter. Oh no, Peter.
points for
We
their
did the
attendance.
part.
Maybe
So
they're
yeah.
given some information.
yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Prepared.
Curious.
We'll just say from Maryland.
You know what I mean?
We'll just say Maryland.
That's how the agenda.
Occupation.
Mobile pain points. We'll put it in Island.
Oh, yeah, try to make him an idol.
How about
Fancy.
Just throw that in there.
Experience.
Okay. So actually, I think we should adjust the as is. We'll have them identify what those phases of it might be.
I say we just say college
And then
graduate.
we can have what this. So like,
That's a resolvable one. But
what are
it's
the
still
steps? Let's say this brown bag. What are the steps you experience follow up might be like, you know, how we might follow up or whatever. So those would be the things that might be pressing communication.
Yeah, both of them had hobbies of fun.
But we can extract.
Plan to take a lunch.
So
So I'm thinking there, how they get there, and then after they leave, what type of experience maybe from stretching out.
So now,
You know, and then
How
we'll
about we
have
put
that
frustration rate?
to be experienced.
with around them?
They get the invite. What's the experience?
I guess it was
That could just
why
be
they were-
application.
Oh, maybe he's trying to
What's
switch.
so on and so forth. How do we do that? And then
why they
maybe those
brown
pain
bags,
points
what-
Yeah.
or
I'm
What
thinking
are-
in
maybe
terms of why they attended the
Ages,
round bag, they
or
need
like how in that instance, yeah.
We got an idea of our
Yeah.
peers, we got an idea of pain points, needs a lot of scrutiny, stuff we're supposed to define.
I don't think it says anything on it.
Well, we can do it in improved experience.
How to improve the pain points?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How can we improve their
I don't think we know
experience?
They're looking that it's a design-centered conference.
Alright, how about,
We don't really know anything.
I
Like
think we're
they're
just supposed to
define-
say what their needs are.
what their needs are professionally is to learn more about
About UX, right?
experience and frustration.
Yeah, that's what
So what?
Yeah, I almost wonder if defining agenda is gonna resolve all those issues.
all of this. Like I may feel like I'm getting more fruitful. Yeah, so I think we can assume. I think we can assume that these people are tech savvy. We can assume that they know what a micro interaction is. So they're looking at they're looking at learning more about UX and UI.
Yeah. That's. We could do like patch together pictures.
Yeah.
And they want to
just
and
Tom Maryland jacket.
and they're looking at learning more and sharing what they're
Reminds me of Pink Panther.
I call this my theme song, actually. It's like a almost like Get Smart, sort of an aloof detective.
So you're calling this a user story as opposed to a user persona.
Unsure about how to prepare.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could be used either way. I think that was a mistake in the wording that I used. In fact, because it probably should be more. I mean, user story or I guess persona, and then the journey would be more the story. So, all right. So, we're gonna start moving things into a user story or a journey map rather. So what we're gonna do is on your stickies, because I don't have enough paper to accommodate it. On this large sticky, or if you guys wouldn't mind maybe moving your stickies that are on there off, and we're gonna put a couple things.
Wait, which all of them or
Just
The ones that are on the sheet,
these?
because we're gonna use that sheet. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna define the phases.
Yeah, just put it down here.
And throw this up here. We have a phase. We have, we're going to call it the 2B experience. And we are going to define the user story in that moment. All right, so we're going to do these three columns, and the way this will work, we're going to center this around this brown bag, and we're going to take it maybe to a week later. Like, how do we take this information and then maybe apply it or keep it in contact or keep it somewhere where you all can start where we all can start to use it, right? So we're going to do a phase, and this phase might be, where do we start, right? Everybody got a notification, an email with the brown bag invite. So that might be our starting point. The end point, maybe 3/4 of the way point is you came to the brown bag. The end point is the follow-up, and the follow-up That makes sense? As far as where that journey would be. So we put what those phases are, what steps might be involved in that phase throughout that. You know, you planned to go to the brown bag, you accepted the invite, you made sure you got some lunch early. So what are those steps you would take in real life, not just being a user? And then what could be the to-be experience based on the pain points that we started to identify? What could we do to build out that experience so it connects all the way through? And then again, what's that user story in that moment? What are they going through? They get the invite. Well, then they go, shit, I got work to do too. So, you know, I got to leave early. You know, what is their story? And what are those things that might come in as we start to think about that experience? So I'm going to put 7 minutes on the clock for us to do that. Again, it's going to be very rapid fire, and I appreciate everybody going through this process. But I'm going to ask you all to start, again, taking this information and breaking out phases, following through to, let's say, a week after, and setting up the experience along with the stories within that. Make sense? Sure.
So we're using these guys? Or are we writing new ones? We're writing new ones, right?
Right, you're going to, so, yeah, and you understand where we're going through the phases.
A week later.
Yeah, we're ending at a week. Let's just say, how do we follow through with this? And then we're somewhere, you came to this brown bag. What did you do? Or what are the phases between all of that?
Well, I mean, did everyone accept?
So let me define the brown bag.
I think you're getting too wide with your.
Yeah.
Here, let's do this.
Yeah, run one stickies and just everybody start throwing things out. You can, yes, yeah.
Into the brown bag afterwards.
It's a free for all again on this one?
Yep.
All right.
Because you might have, there might be somewhere in the phase that you thought of that maybe Jenna didn't consider in Samuel's journey or potential journey.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
What's up? I just changed them to be more about the brown bag, but I didn't change the actual questionnaire that we used for the conference.
I'm not sure what this means. You know?
So what you would do based on your user story,
Right.
what would you do to have, I'm guessing, a better user experience?
Okay.
for each
10 days for each phase. Okay. How about invite events?
What are you looking for?
I got one.
Okay.
What would we change about that experience? What might we change, if anything?
How about more than one time slot?
There you go.
And then again, with the user story, which is
Actual
thinking
brown
of,
bag.
everybody can be thinking about this, you're looking at what those phases are that we're putting up here, maybe what that experience is, and you're thinking about, okay, well, when Sam got that invite, got a reminder, what were they doing? What could they have been doing at that moment? You know,
Feeling good.
and what might have been part of their story as we consider this. You know, because again, they don't exist just to get invited to around that, right? So what else do we have to consider that isn't here? Does that make sense?
Okay.
Are you
We find
sure
a
that's what everyone was doing?
Yeah, well, you can call it an expectation. What we would like it to be, what we think can improve their experience.
Oh, so like, yeah.
interaction, you know?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Are those the assumptions?
How to improve.
Okay.
Yeah, that can be, that's essentially an assumption, because you're assuming that they're gonna want that potential experience. And again, you wanna consider what their needs are and what their pain points are too in that experience. So like if there is an unsure how to prepare, maybe what could we have done after they got the invite to improve that experience, for instance.
That's part of the story.
Oh, this is related to this one. I'll just be a fraction of the dollar. $5.
Other process. Sometimes it's okay to be confused.
That might be why you're there.
Eager to do this again. Sorry.
I think I put dog first, but it was actually cat.
Is this supposed to stress us out?
A little bit.
I don't know.
Don't stress, man.
All right. So time. Cool. All right. So I am going to ask you guys to do another bit of share back. So this time I'm going to start with Sarad and the blue team. The blue team, and have you all share back. And let's try and make it about 30 seconds if we can.
Go, start, go.
So our
Go.
with the phase, he begins by Samuel Smith by reviewing an email after receiving an invite. He accepts the calendar invite and looks up human interaction design on Google. But initially he cancels because his priority changed. He sees a slight reminder of those plans. He drinks some whiskey. And decides to attend the event after all.
That's stressful.
Feel a little better about things.
I like
Had to
this.
go in there with a buzz.
In the 2B UX, so we would like them to receive a reminder in the beginning of the day, reminding about the event, regular interaction updates. Oh yeah, and like them to have regular interactive updates, so to basically get him engaged before the event and build the anticipation. But not too many because you don't want to bother him. Send location info, make sure he gets there. And make sure he sends relevant information. Random stuff.
Send him a coupon for Chick-fil-A if he comes.
Yeah, but Rod just so he has food when he gets there. Send a discount voucher. And send him a helpful article or some Slack integrations or something.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, excuse
No,
me.
no, no. It's no, that's fine. We'll return to this because I think the user story is important, but I do want to sort of move just so we are on our time. So
Sure.
I'll let
Sorry.
the yellow team.
I messed up.
I'll take
No,
it.
you're fine. That was good.
It took too
All right,
long.
you ready?
Yep.
All right, so we have an androgynous Alex, who's 32 from Baltimore and a developer, walked down the hall to get here, was frustrated by the agenda, the experience, having inexperience, and would like to have had a defined agenda, UX education, and some sort of background, and maybe some previous workshops. So in the very beginning phase, similar to the blue team, we have an invite for the brown bag. Making time, the brown bag itself, any notes afterwards, and then going back to work. And through that process, to be user experience would be an invite in advance with an agenda, having more than one time slot to pick from, so that way it makes it easier to make time. At the brown bag, good chairs, guidelines or instructions about what to do to reduce confusion. Maybe afterwards, seeing some sort of a summary and knowing about another opportunity to follow up, and then honoring that schedule to leave and go back to work. And then the user story is, any work obligations make an impact on that invite. Intrigued by the agenda that we could get, but there could be some conflicts during the brown bag, maybe confused about the participation, but then enlightened by the process afterwards and then eager to attend again.
Okay, cool. All right, so so thank you for sharing that. So what we want to do now is let's talk about micro interactions a little bit. But this is really good. And I think one of the cool things that you start to see as Matt goes into the next part is certain themes that you can start to develop. So maybe we're talking about a phase and we say you look up human interaction design, you want relevant links, because you're trying to make a deadline. So what does that mean? You need better information on the topic. So how can we provide better information on the topic universally, provide resources, because we want to help you make that deadline, right? So I need to respect your time as much as I want you to respect our time right now. So how do we get to that why we're doing it based on what those steps and that expected experience is?
So one really small component of human-centered design is microinteractions, which is what we're going to be talking about. Is how we're segueing into it is just a brief introduction on this and thinking of how these microinteractions can be kind of plugged into what we've already done with our user profiles and our general user experience with this brown bag. So what are microinteractions? I'm going to try to go through these slides a little quick, just because we're running out of time here. But the little bits of functionality that make up an entirety of the user experience, individual interactions or cells that make up the interface. It kind of is the feel of the look and feel of a site or app or really anything that's being used there. So what do? They communicate feedback. They accomplish or isolate an individual task. You can manipulate a setting, or you can run it, and they can also prevent user error when using an application. Kind of moving the user along through the entire experience of using a tool or getting something done. Why do microinteractions work? The user has a sense of control with immediate feedback. I hit a button, it does something, it performs a certain task. I feel that sense of accomplishment of getting that done through everything that's presented to me through that microinteraction. The instructions, the microinteraction guides the user through a system. With visual rewards, microinteractions can facilitate a habit. So I can get in the habit of using an app or using a site or going to a certain section and using a tool. Through these microinteractions, I'm going to be doing an action over and over again and not be bored of it and enjoy doing it. A site or application can be bland or appear to be broken without the use of cell animation and these elements integrated. So I wanted to quickly go through these four different parts of what four different elements of a microinteraction. We have trigger, which is a human action or a system trigger, rules, feedback, and then loops and nodes. So just going through briefly what each one is, we have the trigger, which is the physical or digital control or condition that begins a microinteraction. So you can see one example I want to talk about was New York City Metro card system. So basically they basically changed the Metro system to use coins. They went to a touchscreen interface that allows you to get a card. There was a lot of concerns back when this was implemented that people would not. There's a lot of people that speak different languages. They don't really know how to use the Metro card system. How are we going to design this thing to make it work with everybody? And how are people going to be able to figure out that I need to get a card and use this? So one thing they did was through design. This is literally what the touchscreen interface looked like when you walk up. Most people are inclined to hit the start button. You don't even have to hit the start button. You can hit anywhere on the screen to begin. So it's really, that is one great example of a microinteraction, showing you where you should touch even though I just need to hit the screen at all. So what is influencing me to touch the screen to begin the process? They also designed the interface to have one screen per action. So I'm just literally touching one thing to proceed the next step of getting my Metro card. So manual and system triggers. The principal triggers is the principle of a trigger is to make sure you have the trigger positioned where the user will be. So that's a great example, having the start button there, having a menu button on an application. Have the trigger perform a consistent action. A back button going to the right back screen. A menu button opening and expanding all my options. Having that thing happen consistently. Understanding the microinteraction in detail. What will prompt the user to trigger it? And then determining the styling and the positioning of a trigger based on how often I'm going to be using it. The menu icon needs to be a lot bigger than something like search, for example, that I won't be using too much of. Rules. So the physical and digital control condition that begin. Okay, that is a slide. I'll fix that. So at the heart of every microinteraction, there's a set of rules. So I went through, and this is a great diagram of how rules work. Basically, how it responds to a trigger when I click a button. What happens? It opens up. What are the sequence of events after I clicking that button? What feedback is delivered after the user has gone through and interacted with that microinteraction? And then what happens after I've done something? So what is the reward that's delivered to the person after the microinteraction occurs? And then basically rules prevent errors in the system when using an application. So feedback's the next one. So verification to the user, or almost a reward for the person for performing that microinteraction. Here are a few examples on the side here. Basically, just giving that human feel to the user that they've kind of completed an action, making it feel less of a machine, less of a mechanical process, providing a reward through styling of the interface. So loops and modes. Mode is a special part of an application that operates differently than usual. So you don't want to have too many modes in your application. Basically, if I'm going to change the settings of an application or a website or something like that, I'd want that page to be very unique, and I kind of want to feel like I'm being taken away from that main set of microinteractions. Basically, the weather app, I want to remove a city. I would have to go to the settings page. Very different than what the actual application looks like. LinkedIn settings page looks very different than any other page I would see on LinkedIn. And then a loop is a series of commands that is repeated for a set duration. It could be infinite. It could also be for a 10-minute interval. So if I'm attempting to load a video and it's taking over 5 minutes to load, a prompt appears that asks me if I want to download it. So that's a good example of how a loop would behave.
To also give you all just a quick illustration of microinteractions in action, if you think about your phone, and when you take your phone and you put it into mute the sound. On iPhone, it gets a little bit of a vibration to indicate that you just put it into silent mode. That's sort of your trigger being that you flip that switch. The feedback being the vibration and the
rule being that you've done this, and that being the vibration, being the feedback, and then the loop is the length of that interaction when you do it. Similarly, we've been using micro interactions within this. So if you think about it, the music that indicates our 30 seconds is our micro interaction. The trigger being, we're at 30 seconds till our time is up, right? The feedback being, you hear the music. The rule being, once that hits and it gets to that, it sets a loop in which we hear the music and it plays for the rest of that 30 seconds. That micro interaction might be a bit stressful, but it is a micro interaction. It's just sort of, I wanted to use that as a way to illustrate that. Yeah, that's it.
So with the general knowledge that we have of what micro interactions are and what they consist of, let's revisit Chris J and take a closer look at kind of what his preferences are and see what we can do with micro interactions to kind of make his experience with, this is with the conference again, but make his experience a little bit better, and think of it in terms of the brown bag. What can we do with micro interactions? They don't have to be overly technical, but what can we do with micro interactions that make this brown bag experience a little bit better? So going through what his experience with technology, he's fairly advanced with computers and devices, using them on a daily basis. We have general applications that he uses. He uses Chrome, Microsoft Suite web applications, HubSpot, Google Analytics, etc. And website and application expectations. So he expects every site to be responsive and perform well on all devices, and likes site speed. He needs quick load times. He has a busy schedule, so he needs to have information right away, very immediately. Some micro interaction samples made by Chris today. Again, for the conference. Woke up for the conference, turned off his iPhone alarm, used his toast with more breakfast. He hit the a little bit more button so that he got a little more toast, where it wasn't ready yet, so he hit that button to do that. Used Waze to navigate to the conference, found his desired sessions using the mobile site, and then tweeted a photo of this session.
So we're at our hour, so I think we might have to just skip this particular one. Okay. And we should probably just wrap up and bring it all together and do our wrap. And then. Sure. So, I mean, typically with this part, we would develop a vignette of the user based on a micro-interaction prioritization grid. So basically going through possible micro-interactions that would enhance the experience and kind of ordering them in priority. Yeah, so we would do a prioritization grid. It's just we're right up at our time, and I know everybody's got work to do too. So just to brine it all together. So again, the outcomes of our exercises. Now again, the hope for timing, we would have had the time to do our prioritization grid, which would allow us to figure out what are priorities. And what we would have done is with the 2B experience map, we might look at these things and say, what are priorities? What are the key priorities for Sam here? You know, it might be having, more read prep. And we'll start to set up ideas of what are their priorities and what's most feasible to us, what's easy for us to do, all of these things, and we would decide on actions that we could actually start to take based on that. Because now we have a lot of understanding on that. Another thing that, and I'm going to throw this out here, is the idea of validating. Now, everybody got a little sticker that I gave you when we started, right? So the stickers that were, this was based on the yellow users, right? You guys are yellow, right? So Samuel Smith is an iOS developer, college grad, technical degree, but the needs and the pain points, these are where we can start to validate. So to that yellow group, would you say your need is having concise information about the topic, UX and UI, and being able to grow your personal knowledge for your career? So that's a fair assessment. And then our pain points, you're unsure how to prepare for this, and you're a bit stressed and worried about timing and your ability to accomplish that. Is that a fair statement or fair assumptions that were made on this side? Right? So we're able to validate that because now instead of us saying, oh, we think we have a generalized user, we have the person. Now, not in every case that we have the person in the room at the table with us. So we may have to go back and we may have to use those assumptions and then take them back to a user or to a person that we can use that to validate with in the instances that you don't. Now, the blue group, where were our pain points? So,
So on the
is it here, Alex, right? So Alex is a developer. You walk down the hall, right? But you would like a little more prep info, and you're concerned about inexperience and a frustration of due to that. Is that a fair statement to people who were blue?
Yep.
Would that be? All right. So we're able to, again, use this to validate our expectations before we actually get into the step of developing an experience based on these assumptions. We can validate, and if we're wrong, then we step back and we say, okay, well, let's start maybe a portion of this process over with the new information we have. And then again, we can find where there are commonalities between groups. We can find there are commonalities between Sam and Alex, even though they're in slightly different groups.
So after this, we kind of elaborate a little bit more in terms of what microactions are, keeping them simple, and what to avoid. One value of microactions is again, keeping it very simple, not overcomplicating the user, talking about cognitive load. We don't want the user to have to think too much when they're doing their tasks and going through this process. And being mindful of repetition of microactions. Will a animation that we're doing with the interface annoy the user? Rules of animation. I might cut this slide out, but just basically with microactions, we want to keep in mind rules of animation. There's an actual book on this from Disney, Develop Principles of Animation. So adhering to a lot of those things, keeping single movements, keeping animations fast, smooth, natural, and simple, and purposeful. So what can we do to kind of animate an interface that will make it fit these principles and not overwhelm the user? So functional animation, we're seeing a lot of this in application and site design now. It's a way to kind of use gesture-driven animation to kind of link an interface together and kind of give it that flow. And we can see a lot of these samples from the new iPhone of how these animations are working with these applications. So I also wanted to include some real world applications of microactions. Google Apps, the voice activation, saying "Okay Google," working with I think that's a screenshot from the new phone, the Pixel, and then just general Google search, saying "Okay Google" will trigger a noise, and then the microphone animation on the screen for the app, so that I can begin talking to it. Other examples are Xbox One and then the Comcast remotes. Harvest app, so basically personal messaging coming from this Harvest application. You can see I'm starting a timer that's in the future, so they're alerting me of it in a comfortable way. And so just thinking in terms of it's not just the animations we're doing, it's not just the styling, it's also the actual message that's being presented in the alert that gives it that new feel. The Google "I'm feeling lucky" button, I always thought this button was kind of dumb, but now they've kind of revamped it. I'll look into why this animation's not working. But basically, now it works where I hover over it, it says I'm feeling hungry, I'm feeling curious, I'm feeling like a movie. And when I click that button, the functionality is different for each one, to where it will take me to a list of nearby restaurants if I'm feeling hungry. It's just a great example of how Google's reworked something that wasn't really working before, and made it better. So I'll look at why it's not working. And then Gmail attachment alerts, providing an alert on my screen when I've said "see attached" in the message, and it's saying you don't have anything attached. Are you sure you want to send it now? The Waze navigation app, I'm sure you guys have interacted with this before. If I'm in the morning, I'm not at work, it asks me if I'm all the options of getting there and if there's any traffic that I'm going to experience. Same going home from work. So a lot of the information from these slides are based on this book. It's a great read. There's also some podcast options as well, and interviews with Dan Seifer. Getting started with interactions. So we might want to think of how can we implement this into my current website or application. There's tons of resources and tutorials that I've included on the next slide. Also, just thinking of base CSS3 transitions and JavaScript, there's a lot we can do to kind of animate things and give the site more movement. Prototyping tools like the following here can kind of prototype those type of animations and those type of journeys through an application, kind of illustrate that before it actually has to be built. And then begin the process with messaging and planning. So working with the marketing team, what do we want to say that gives our interface, gives our site more of a human feel, and what can we do through design and through some of these tools to get that movement in life.
So one thing I'll just sort of add on that in terms from the experience standpoint and the micro interaction standpoint. If you think about it, when we make sites, or you think about a movie, right? You don't go to the movie for the plot, you go to the movie for the experience, right? We didn't watch, say, Disney's Cinderella because, woman works in her house with mean aunts, goes to a ball and gets married to a prince. Nobody cares about that story. There's the experience that you have within that story that brings you in there. But you think like the Gmail example, nobody cares that it sends email. Like everybody sends email, but does everybody? You go to Gmail for the experience that if I mention an attachment and I don't actually have an attachment, it reminds me. If I don't put a subject, it lets me know I didn't put a subject instead of just sending it off or making me look stupid. So now I've got this experience that I'm used to with this application, and that was using a micro interaction that wasn't the main part of the plot of the usage, but it was part of the story that made your life better, and that's why we use these human aspects, because we know that user needs to send email, but we know that human needs to send email and it has so much going on in their life they might have forgotten to put that attachment. And that's the difference between using that user-centered versus human-centered mindset when we're developing how those micro interactions come in.
Also, it prevented the error from happening, and it also shows kind of the detail of the development. The person values that tool because they can see that whoever developed that spent the time to add that facet, to add that piece to the application of checking for that error happening and providing that message to it, and making my life easier.
So thank you all for sitting through. That's our presentation. If there are any quick questions, I know you all stuck around 15 extra minutes with us, but any thoughts, questions, or even feedback in how we handle this for the conference or just in terms of the content itself?
I would take a look at how you're defining user stories.
Yep.
And compare that to user personas. Oftentimes, user personas are used in user journeys, and user stories can be.
Right.
But they're two different things. User stories are more like tasks.
Yep.
Like, I'm this actor, and I'm trying to accomplish this task, and that folds out into epics.
Yep.
And that's usually used in user acceptance testing. But a user persona is, here's a person with a real name, could be fictitious, place they're from, age, job position, their motives, their experience, their desires, things of that. So you're giving them a personality.
Right.
So if you're going to use the terminology, I don't want to say it right, but that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and I think that was a just sort of oversight in our thinking about it, because we just kept saying, oh, user story, all right, cool. But yeah, probably a shift in that language to again, user persona and user journey.
Yep.
And that builds the story.
And stories are often, I have an example of a user journey document that I can share with you. The user stories can be things like, I'm a CEO at a company. I received an invite, I opened it up.
Right.
And that helps define, okay, well, what system needs to be built to support the description of that story.
Yeah.
A user story could be like, you have a persona called Gina, and it's like Gina wants to get a pair of shoes so she can go out clubbing at night.
Yeah.
That's the story. It's like very, very simple. It's just like 1 or 2 sentences.
What were we supposed to do with the stickers?
The stickers were really just so that you could be. So we're going to use the stickers to later validate, and that's
Gotcha.
just so that you remember what group you were in. Like you had the yellow sticker,
Oh, okay.
just on the yellow sheet.
So 1 to keep, 1 to give.
Right.
Gotcha.
I like the ambiguity of it to start off.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you did that on purpose or not, but like making people uncomfortable
Yeah.
to kind of help build that into your user story that like the users needed more information
Right.
to get them.
I think what
Great,
I'm
thank you, Alex.
still struggling with is how to kind of link it to micro interactions.
It does seem like it's a little bit, yeah, it does seem like there's 2 separate presentations in there a little bit. But
because they were.
Yeah.
we wanted to do 2 presentations, and they said, can we merge them into one? So we're trying
it
to do
is
that.
related though.
It's related.
You just got to bring it back to like the micro interaction is the timing and then what happens.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't make sense to talk about this type of story like in this context.
Mhm.
It doesn't make sense to talk about this type of story and like going to a conference and then bring that back to like a button animation.
Right.
It doesn't connect it.
Yeah, I think that's sort of part of the reason we decided to, again, revolve the mapping and all of that stuff to what's happening in that moment so that we can sort of understand how the micro interactions play from a physical standpoint, not just digital.
And the other part is that we missed, a couple of slides there and some explanation that might have helped. So if that's there, it might be a different story. But
Yeah, no, but I think, being able to make it concise and simple helps everybody too. So
it's good though. I mean, just,
thank you.
Yeah. Good.
Sorry, I wasn't here to help.
It's fine.
I had a ton of work to do.
I'm blocking you on
Facebook?
Instagram.
Nice work, guys.
Thank you. No, it's fine. I'll share out the video. It's a little bit crazy, but it's there. Yeah, thanks for coming, Chad. I'm glad.
Yeah, I think you're gonna get a lot.